Which is better, the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G or the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G? Well, in this video, we're going to find out. What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, coming at you with my comparison of the Galaxy A54 5G versus the Galaxy A53 5G. Now, as the names do imply, the A54 5G is the successor to the A53 5G, having recently been launched, and the A53 5G was launched about a year ago. Now, since being launched, the A53 5G has been a massive success for Samsung, being one of their top-selling smartphones. So I'm definitely expecting the A54 5G to have similar success. Now, I will be linking to both of these phones in the video description so that you can see the most up-to-date pricing and availability. I know that you can buy both phones factory unlocked directly through Samsung, but they're also both offered at a variety of different carriers. And typically, if you get them through the carriers, you will save quite a bit of money. Now, the downside of that is that you can't typically take those carrier phones to other carriers, but if you already find yourself being loyal to your carrier, then it might make more sense to go that route. Now, as far as MSRPs go, both phones feature an MSRP of $449, so they are meant to be mid-range devices. So certainly, keep your expectations in line. These phones are not meant to be an alternative to the Galaxy S23 Ultra, for example. Now, at first glance, there are definitely quite a few changes between the two phones. The A54 5G has a much different form factor, especially in the sense that the corners are a lot more rounded, whereas the A53 5G has boxier corners. And then another major difference is the backs of the devices. So we have a different camera module setup here. We're actually losing the fourth camera on the A54 5G, but I'll be talking about that a little bit later on in the video. And then another major difference is that we're getting a glass back on the back of the A54 5G compared to plastic on the A53. Now, I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I do, of course, prefer glass over plastic, but at the same time, I do like this frosted finish that we have with the A53 5G, as it doesn't really pick up any fingerprints. Now, when putting the two phones on level ground, the A53 5G is actually slightly larger, and the display on this device is bigger as well. So we do have a slightly smaller display with the A54 5G this time around at 6.4 inches versus 6.5 inches with the A53. Now, both phones do feature Corning Gorilla Glass 5, so that does make the displays very durable here. And actually, we have Gorilla Glass 5 on the back of the A54 5G as well. Now, with both phones, we're getting Super AMOLED 120Hz refresh rate displays. Both displays are 1080p. We're also getting a PPI of 403 with the A54 5G versus a PPI of 405 with the A53. We're getting a 19.5:9 aspect ratio with the A54 compared to a 20:9 aspect ratio with the A53. So the A54 is slightly wider and shorter as far as the aspect ratio goes compared to the A53. And then with the A54, we're getting an 82.9% screen-to-body ratio compared to an 85.4% screen-to-body ratio with the A53. So interestingly, the A53 actually has smaller bezels than the A54. But on the other hand, the bezels are much more symmetrical on the A54 compared to the A53. So I'm certainly curious to know which design here you prefer. Overall, I think the A54 probably looks a little bit more refined compared to the A53, but at the end of the day, those little differences aren't really that significant. It does seem like, though, that the display on the A54 is a bit brighter compared to the A53. So as far as the display goes, I do think it's better here with the newer phone. Now, with both phones, we do have 32 megapixel front-facing cameras, and they are located in the hole punches up top here. And then with both phones, they are offered in 128 gigabytes of storage, along with microSD card expansion, so quite a bit of storage. Now, neither of these two phones have wireless charging, but they do both have in-display fingerprint sensors. So I'll give that a try right now. Starting off with the A54 5G, and there we go, very fast and responsive. Now we'll try that with the A53 5G. There we go, maybe slightly slower, but overall, the fingerprint sensors work really well with both phones. And then both devices do support face unlock as an alternative method to get into them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are some pretty major differences when it comes to the cameras on these two phones. The first thing is, the literal quantity of cameras is different. We have a triple camera setup on the A54 5G with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide angle camera that can capture images at up to 123 degrees, and we have a 5 megapixel macro camera for close-up images. And then on the A53 5G, with a 64 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide angle camera that can also capture images at 123 degrees, a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera for portrait mode, and a 5 megapixel macro camera for close-up images. Now, not having the depth sensing camera with the A54 5G really makes no difference. The AI that's in this phone can do portrait mode just as well, if not better, without the depth sensing camera. So even though there's less cameras here with the A54 5G, it really makes no difference as far as actually using the phone. And as far as the megapixel count being lower on the A54 5G, Samsung claims that you're actually getting better photo quality with the sensor they have this time around. So even though it is 50 megapixels versus 64, the results are still better. Now here's how things look on the camera apps on both phones. I feel like the A53 has always had a great camera, and I'm also very happy with the cameras in the A54. So for the most part, I consider it kind of a tie, but things are better still with the A54. But we can switch from the main cameras to the ultra wide cameras. Then from there, we can exit out and head over to the More tab, where we can access the macro cameras for those close-up images. So overall, a lot of different options. We can even switch over to portrait mode and take those nice photos with blurred out backgrounds. And then we can flip around to the front-facing cameras and take portrait selfies as well. There's even a group selfie option to crop out a little bit. And you can also take standard selfies too. So both phones have a lot of different camera abilities, which I'm certainly a big fan of. Now internally with these devices, we're getting 6 gigabytes of RAM, and then the processors are different. So with the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, we're getting the Samsung Exynos 1380 processor compared to the Samsung Exynos 1280 processor with the A53. Now, overall, both processors are mid-range, so don't expect them to be super powerful. They're definitely good for the most fundamental tasks that you do with a smartphone, like phone calls, text messages, social media, web browsing, watching video content. All those things will be great on both phones, but if you want to do some more high-performance tasks, such as video editing or high-performance gaming, I could see some potential frustrations coming up. I did do a benchmark test using Geekbench 6 on both phones, and you can see that the scores are actually decently similar. The multi-core score is a lot better though in the A54 5G, but overall, it seems like with the A54, it's really just more of a slight improvement rather than a really dramatic improvement. And that does reflect upon my experience of using both phones. Without a doubt, you're gonna have a much better experience with the A54 5G, but it's not like this phone is significantly faster compared to its predecessor. Now, video recording with both phones maxes out at 4K for both the front and rear cameras. Both phones also feature 5,000 milliamp hour internal batteries. They also both feature 25 watt fast charging. Both phones at this time do have Android 13 with Samsung's One UI 5.1. Now, since the A53 5G did come with Android 12, keep in mind that you will technically be able to get an additional Android version out of the A54, as both phones get 4 years of Android updates, but since the A54 is launching with one newer version of Android, then you'll get an additional version of Android. And then both phones have NFC, they both feature IP67 dust and water resistance, and they both have stereo speakers. Now, taking a closer look at the hardware of the two phones, I already talked quite a bit about the front panels here. I do prefer the look of the A54 5G just because it's more symmetrical and just looks like a more premium phone compared to its predecessor. Now, both phones do feature plastic around the sides. However, it's a glossy finish on the A53 versus a frosty finish on the A54. But on the left side of both phones, there's nothing. On the right side, both phones have volume up, volume down, and the power buttons. Then up top here on the A54, we have the slot for the micro SD card and SIM card, and then both phones do have the noise canceling microphones up top. Then on the bottom of the A54, we have the microphones, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and we have the speaker. And then on the A53, we have the micro SD card and SIM card slot, microphone, USB-C port, and then also we have the speaker here. And then on the back of the two phones, as I mentioned before, we have different looking camera modules and then with the Samsung logos, and that's pretty much it. So I am glad that we have a glass back on the A54, but I wish it had a frosted finish similar to the A53 instead of what we're getting here with the glossy back, mostly because it does pick up a lot of fingerprints. So in conclusion, there is certainly a lot to like about the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G. This phone is a solid successor to the A53 5G, and this phone certainly isn't a major redesign by any means. They really just kind of evolved the A53 into what we have here. So that's a good move, I feel like, for Samsung because the A53 was already very successful. So there's no need to mess with a working formula that's already getting them good results. And without a doubt, the A54 5G will do really well. But most importantly, I'm curious to know what you think about these two devices. Are you happy with the A54, or are you hoping that we'd be getting further upgrades even more so than what we're getting here? Definitely let me know in the comment section below. But this is Kevin here, and I will see you in the next one.